Hi there everybody, how you going? My name is Patrice. You may remember me from previous projects such as A's for Alien podcast and Full Metal Tuxedo. Well, here we are. Oh, don't mind that monster growling. You're gonna have to let me know if you like my intro music or not. Or if it's a bit over the top, I'm not sure. Anyway, here we are. We're back. And as I previously mentioned, I have another podcast called A's for Alien. And this podcast, is its sister called Keeping It Supernatural. And I imagine that if you're here listening to this right now, you have found me through those channels. I created this one. It's been sitting there for a while and I've just been looking for the perfect opportunity, I guess, to launch it. And what other better opportunity is there than a Halloween Spooktacular special? I should mention though that if this is your first time hearing my voice, being introduced to me, then I would suggest that you go and check out A for Alien, which is my little alien baby, which I love. But obviously like and subscribe this channel as well, because this is going to be more geared around kind of the cryptid, supernatural, hauntings, hometown legends, all that kind of stuff that I find to kind of keep the alien channel purist, to keep it purely about aliens and abductions and cattle mutilations and everything else that we've come to love and expect from the study of ufology. But I digress. Let's get back on topic. Tonight, we're talking about things that go bump in the night. Things that scare you. Well, really it's things that have scared me in the past, because when I was brainstorming what I should do for this episode, which by the way, I am releasing as a Halloween special. If you're listening to this sometime in the future, or maybe sometime in the past, I'm not quite sure or convinced. We live in a purely linear timeline. Sorry, as I was brainstorming this episode, what I thought would be really interesting to do is describe to you some stories that have been told to me that have always creeped me out. Because one thing which, you know, I always seem to do is I'm always the girl at parties that asks the question, like, has anything strange or paranormal ever happened to you? Have you ever seen a UFO? Do you think you've seen a ghost? And, you know, it's quite interesting the kind of answers that you get from people, especially the ones that you think, you know, are non-believers or wouldn't be interested in that kind of stuff. And I don't know about you, but I always find people who are skeptical, or people that you assume to be skeptical, their stories are, I guess, in some way more compelling perhaps than a story told by someone like me, who's obviously, you know, researched the phenomena and knows a lot about it and understands the folklore behind it. So I find it really interesting when you ask that question to people and they come back with an answer that kind of blows your mind a little bit, because they've told you a story about something which you might have researched or read about before. Alrighty, so a quick game is a good game and we should get onto these stories, right? Because I know that that's what you're all here for. Not to listen to me harp on about nothing, but to harp on about ghosts. Alrighty, and to kick off this evening's spooky story spectacular, we're starting with one of my favorite topics, and that is a story told to me about 2 or 3 years ago by one of my friends about his encounter with shadow people when he was a child. So, shadow people. This story came from an unlikely source. It's somebody who I work with and someone that I deeply admire and look up to. So to hear that they had a kind of paranormal experience, and especially one which is so well known in the supernatural circles, I guess, like a lot of people know what a shadow person is. A lot of people have heard about stories of dark cloaked figures, or most famously the Hat Man. You know, I think it was a bit more popular a fair few years ago than what it is now, but I still feel like, you know, it's one of the main players up there when it comes to the most common kind of ghostly apparitions that people see. I feel like most people, if not all people, if they're being really honest with themselves, you know, have seen some kind of dark shadow out the corner of their eye. Or, maybe looked into the darkness and seen something that's a little bit darker than the rest of the darkness. And for that split second, your mind thinks that there's someone standing there, but you know better. Or you flick on the light and there's nothing there. So on this particular evening, my friend, for the purpose of this story, we'll call him Randall, was staying with his grandmother in rural New South Wales. It was school holidays or something, and apparently, as the story goes, he was staying there by himself, but he knew that his mother and his sister were going to be arriving the next day early. So when he would sleep there, he'd sleep in her bedroom. He was only like five or six at this point, and he'd sleep in her bedroom on this rollaway bed. And he would say that because it was literally in the middle of nowhere, their house was on the one street into town. So whenever anyone would drive past, you would see the entire room kind of be lit up by the headlights because it was on this corner. So it wasn't entirely unusual for that to happen, but it was, kind of rare, especially where it was. Like, it was normally just pitch black and completely quiet. Like the kind of darkness that you wouldn't be able to see your hand in front of your face. So he's laying on this little fold-out bed and his grandmother's very happily asleep next to him in her bed. And he's woken up because he can hear the sound of an oncoming car. And so the room is slightly lit up with a little bit of the light from the headlights. And when he looks, he sees, standing maybe an arm length away, a dark figure standing by the bed. Now, in his mind, he just thought that his mum and his sister had come a little bit earlier to their grandparents' house. And so, thinking that it's his sister, he says to her, "Hey, sissy, what are you doing?" But the figure doesn't move, it just stays there dead still. And he said he started to get a little bit freaked out, and so he spoke to it again, trying to get a response out of it because he thought it was just his sister trying to scare him. So kind of more impassionately, he's like, "Hey, sissy, what are you doing?" And because he was getting so freaked out, he kind of reached out to her to kind of hit her, he said, almost punch her. But as he did, his hand just went through whatever this was. Remember, as this is happening, the whole time the room's kind of getting lighter and lighter because this car's getting closer and closer. And then at the exact moment that the car's headlights lights up the entire room, he realizes that there is no shadow, that there's nothing there, and that he was completely alone the entire time. Alrighty, so let's start this with a question. What is a shadow person? So according to Wikipedia, the first line reads, "A shadow person, also known as a shadow figure or a black mass, is a perception of a patch of shadow as a living humanoid figure and interpreted as the presence of a spirit or other entities by believers in the paranormal or the supernatural." So whilst the concept of a shadow person isn't completely brand new, as many religions, belief systems, etc. have shadow people as, I guess, a staple of their stories, their mythology, let alone the fact that many ghost stories and folklore legends speak of, shadowy dark figures. The actual idea of a shadow person in the way that we're discussing it now kind of was first talked about on a radio show called Coast to Coast with Art Bell. And it was in April 2021 when Art Bell interviewed a man purporting to be a Native American elder called Thunderstrikes, also known as Harley Swifty Reagan. And during the show, listeners were encouraged to submit drawings of shadow people that they had seen. And a large number of these drawings were immediately shared publicly on the Coast to Coast website. And what people realized was that they were seeing the same kind of entity. That same year, a woman called Heidi Hollis published her first book on shadow people, and then she became a regular guest on Coast to Coast speaking about shadow people. Interestingly, she put forward the theory that these shadow figures were actually negative alien entities that could be repelled by various means, including invoking the name of Jesus Christ. However, many other experiencers would disagree with that and believe that the shadow people are actually benevolent and that no harm is done. And even some of them will even kind of like recoil if they've been spotted or try to actively kind of hide. Another theory on shadow people that has been put forward in recent years is that they're some kind of interdimensional traveler. And of course, we have the ever popular belief that they may be some kind of demonic entity and perhaps be in some way related to the incubus and succubus stories that are often also related to and associated with sleep paralysis. Interestingly enough, there is an entire community of people, drug users, specifically methamphetamines, that all claim to see the same kind of creature whilst they're under the influence of that drug. Interestingly, a psychiatrist called Jack Potts kind of added a bit of a conspiratorial component to this phenomena of people using methamphetamine seeing the same shadow person by claiming that, you know, whilst yes, they may be perhaps like a sleep deprived visual hallucination, you know, they're not seeing things like shadow dogs or shadow birds, shadow cars. They see shadow people standing in doorways, walking behind you, coming at you on the sidewalk. Another explanation for these visual hallucinations could be some kind of mental disorder or illness such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, which may be, manifest itself as shadowy figures in the peripheral vision of people. But that doesn't explain when one of these entities could potentially touch you. How do you describe that away as just a visual hallucination? As this phenomena quite often happens to people when they're in bed, it was quite easy to find a story which kind of was similar to the story that Randall experienced when he was a child. I found a post in the subreddit Hatman by the user Scorpio Tendencies, where she titles her post, "Hatman Touched Me?" I'll begin with saying that from my early childhood up to my mid-30s, I've regularly experienced sleep paralysis. This was often paired with feelings of pressure on different parts of my body. Sometimes it felt like I was being held down by my ankles. Other times pressure on my chest like being held down. Sometimes the pressure of something sitting on the end of my bed. One time something jumped from the dresser and rattled my bookshelf. All not fun and always frightening. I've had a few weird visitation stories from, air quotes, beings throughout my life that I might post in another Reddit for another day. But the scariest was when I was 21 and staying at my boyfriend's house and encountered what I now know as the Hatman. I was dreaming of being in my elementary school gymnasium having a sleepover with some of my friends. We were all laughing and joking about when all of a sudden my dream went blackout and silence. The laughter abruptly stopped, which startled me. In my dream, I began to feel a dark presence near me, caressing my hand. The sensation was not isolated to my dream. It was so realistic feeling it woke me up, only to find my hand dangling over the side of the bed, and a black figure, not see-through. I knew this because there was a nightlight behind the being in the wall, and the light outlined its head, kneeling beside me. It was caressing the top of my hand. I sat up immediately and made an audible sound. The figure moved, shifted to the doorway. I could see its form perfectly. Shadow, black body, almost as tall as the doorway, with a brimmed hat. The weird thing is, I could not see its eyes. The being deliberately was covering its eyes with one hand. I covered my eyes with a comforter in fear, and took it back down a moment later. The being remained in the doorway, eyes covered, blacking out the light behind it from the nightlight that was in the hallway. I turned to wake my boyfriend up, hoping he'd see it too. The moment I turned away and looked back, the being was gone. My boyfriend saw nothing. It wasn't until years later I was Googling Hatman Ghost when I saw the drawings of this figure all over the internet. Needless to say, I was surprised to realize this is a global phenomenon. I've never seen this being again, at least at night. I once had a past life regression hypnosis session and saw this figure right before I was shot into a previous life. Take that for what you will. I remain curious and open-minded. The universe is a continually interesting place of mysteries. So if you're a long-time listener of my work, you'll probably remember hearing me speak about shadow people in the past, and that's because it's a phenomena that I have had intriguing kind of experiences with, because the first time that I ever had sleep paralysis, and it was the first and the last time that I had sleep paralysis that I hadn't, tried to invoke myself as a way of getting my power back, because I had a terrifying experience with it about 10 years ago where I actually saw, it wasn't a shadow person, but it was like this giant tarantula creature looking thing on the roof. So yeah, I've guessed that I've seen things in sleep paralysis, and that experience scared me so much that it then began kind of like a goal of mine to try and understand the phenomena better. And what I did to do that was I would try to do kind of meditation techniques that I found online to kind of put myself into an altered state of being between being awake and being asleep. And the way I think I did that was I would meditate, but with my arm in the air. And there was a time where I was able to induce this state, which felt like how the sleep paralysis felt for me. So when I did that, it was the second time that I've ever experienced sleep paralysis. There was a presence and an entity at the end of my bed. And similarly to the story, it was, this amorphous black blob that probably was about 7 foot tall, and I could feel it standing at the end of my bed. And it didn't speak to me like with words, but I felt like it communicated to me telepathically. And it was kind of strange because it said to me, am I real or am I not real? And then laughed at me. And from that point on, I wasn't afraid of it, because I think I realized that it was myself, like it was my own mind, because that was the projection of what I was trying to discover. Like, was this phenomena really just a chemical, reaction in my brain when my body woke up before my mind did, or my mind woke up before my body did, or was there something to it? Was it supernatural? And so the answers that I was hoping to find, it asked me that same question. And, I felt like, oh, that must mean that it is just a projection of myself. But I did sense and see that presence, and I did see that dark amorphous blob that people describe as a shadow person. If you have a shadow person story and you'd like it to share it with me, and maybe one day hear it on the show, I'd love for you to send it through to me. My email address is keepingitsupernaturalpodcast@gmail.com. And if you are tech savvy enough to record it and send it through as a voice recording, that would be really cool too, so you can tell your own story in your own words if you like. I can tell you right now that I am regretting recording this right before I go to bed, because I am sufficiently freaked out already, and it's only story 1. Just quickly on seeing shadow people and ghosts, I do just quickly want to also touch on this information which is distributed by Mental Health America in regards to people who believe that they're seeing ghosts or shadows. I guess what they're trying to say is that if you are seeing things that aren't there, or if you think that you're seeing things that aren't there, then it doesn't hurt to kind of question whether something more serious might be going on. So by asking yourself, how often does this happen? Are you sure that no one else is seeing it? That they say that might sound like a strange question, but it is important to check your reality. Does seeing strange things bother you? And do you experience other things that are weird or hard to explain, like hearing voices or feeling like people are watching you all the time? And if you answer the above questions with yes, then you might be struggling with the early signs of psychosis. So, then they go on to give a little bit more information about that, and saying that if your symptoms are getting worse, especially when you're stressed or you're not getting enough sleep, that you should consider reaching out for help, because the sooner you do, the sooner things will get better, especially if it's something that you're struggling with. So that's just my little piece there, that if that can help you in some small way, you don't need to struggle alone and you don't need to wait. And that taking early steps, if you are experiencing something like this and it is troubling you, is the key to getting better sooner. But without further ado, let's get on to our next story. Okay, so this next story stuck with me for a very long time, and it comes from a listener email that I received when we were working on Full Metal Tuxedo and we were asking for listener submissions. And it was from this guy who was into urban exploring, or urban-X sometimes is what it's called as well. And he was telling the story about how he had been exploring this old abandoned country club / golf club resort thing in his hometown. He attached photos too, which were pretty cool. Now, obviously, urban exploring is illegal, and I'm not in any way condoning that kind of behavior, but it is what it is. I find abandoned places pretty fascinating, but don't do it, because there's lots of dangers, and not just the dangers I'm about to tell you about, but very practical dangers such as asbestos and unsafe buildings. So he's there with his friend, and I'm not quite sure how late it was, but I feel like maybe it wasn't too late, because they could still relatively see. It was probably around dusk time, and he said that there was a fog which had kind of crept in. And so after they'd explored the pool area of this resort, they were venturing out, and they could hear this sound that sounded like a puppy crying, like a little tiny puppy. And I mean, like, when you hear a little puppy, your initial instinct is to look for the puppy, right? Like, I love puppies. Everybody loves puppies. But he looked over at his friend, and his friend just looked at him and pulled him down beside him and shook his head. And he pointed over to something which was just on the rise, just a little way over from where they were, that was partially concealed by the fog. And instead of a little puppy that was making the noise, he looked over and it looked like a giant Alsatian cross Doberman looking creature that was kind of crouched down like a person. So not standing on all fours like a dog would, but kind of crouched like a person that was trying to conceal themselves. And I think for them it was scary for two reasons, because it may have just been their eyes playing tricks on them, like if it was a person or a police officer that was trying to find somebody that was trespassing where they shouldn't have been, or are we dealing with something a lot more nefarious? So anyway, they're sitting there, like, not even daring to breathe in case it gives away their position, when suddenly a hare starts to run off in the distance. And so the noise, even though it's foggy, makes this creature kind of stand up upright. And they said it was around 7 foot tall, and just took off after this hare on 2 legs. And so as I was reading this, I was thinking to myself, like, holy shit, that may be one of the most terrifying dogman sightings I've ever heard. And yeah, the dogman, that's what we're doing next. I love dogman stories. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love a Bigfoot story just as much as the next person, but there's something that just fucking irks me. Is irks the right word? I don't think so. There's something that really just icks me out about dogman stories, because they're like Bigfoot encounters on crack. Like, they're just super fucking freaky. And if you have never been down a dogman encounter rabbit hole before, then this Halloween is the time to do it, because I don't know, it's just the way the stories are told, the imagery, I guess, like all of it is just way more creepier than, in my opinion, any other kind of cryptid sighting. So in dogman lore, probably the most popular, I guess, the most well-known legends are the Michigan Dogman and also perhaps the Beast of Bray Road, which heralds from Wisconsin. I know for me, as someone who's from Australia, I think my kind of first introduction to the Dogman was through the Michigan Dogman stories. So according to Michigan folklore, the Dogman was allegedly witnessed in 1887 first in Wexford County, Michigan. The creature is described as being 7 foot tall and has either amber eyes or blue eyes. It's a bipedal creature with the torso of a human man and a howl like a scream. According to the legend, the Michigan Dogman appears in 10-year cycles on years that end in 7. Sightings have been reported in several locations throughout Michigan, but primarily in the northwestern quadrant of the Lower Peninsula. The Odawa Indians tell stories of seeing this dogman-like creature dating back hundreds of years, but the story from which this legend heralds is notably from a story that 2 lumberjacks told in 1887, who reported that they encountered a large creature that they described as having a man's body and a dog's head. Then in 1937 in Paris, Michigan, a Mr. Robert Fortney was attacked by a pack of wild dogs that he said walked on 2 legs. Throughout the 1950s, 60s and 70s, dogman sightings still persisted. And then in 1987, disc jockey Steve Cook at WCFM in Traverse City, Michigan recorded a song called The Legend, which he initially played as an April Fool's joke based on legends that he'd heard growing up from all around North America. And when he created the song, he was completely unaware of this Michigan Dogman. Steve Cook still remains skeptical to this day, stating, "I'm extremely skeptical because I've sort of seen the way folklore becomes built from the creation of this song and what it's turned into. But I do believe people who think they saw something really did see something. I also think the Dogman provides them with the avenue to explain what they couldn't explain to themselves." So what started as a joke, after he played the song, he actually began to get listeners calling in and telling him that they've encountered a similar creature to the one that he had written the song about. And after a while, it became the most requested song on the station, and he sold cassettes of the song for $4 and donated the proceeds from his single to an animal shelter, which I think is very sweet. So as I've been researching this topic, I've come across a very interesting article from the Midland Daily News that I think you'll find compelling. Or maybe not. It really depends on what side of the skeptical fence you sit on with this one. Michigan trucker believes he encountered shot the Dogman. Dogman gives UFOs Bigfoot a run for their money. 'Tis the season of the eerie and the unexplained, the legends and other shared tales told around campfires and passed down from generation to generation to inspire terror, or to warn others of malevolent creatures that may live among us. One Michigan truck driver travelling through the Manistee National Forest 5 years ago had an experience with a creature at the heart of one of the state's most popular urban legends, the Michigan Dogman, and it changed his life forever. Trucker Joe Barger, 59, recently recounted his story to the host of YouTube channel What Lurks Beneath, which tells stories about the mysterious and supernatural, with 342,000 subscribers. The video featuring Barger's interview was posted to the channel on September 12, 2020, and has close to 150,000 views. Wouldn't that be nice? Don't you guys forget to like and subscribe. Back to the story after that shameless plug. Even if you don't believe what I'm saying is truthful, it might be something you can draw on in the future in case you do ever have an experience with Dogman, which is an advantage I never had, Barger said in the video. He explained he thinks it's important for Michigan residents to be aware of what he saw. Barger, a 6-year Army veteran, was transporting 43,000-pound load of paper from a mill in northern Michigan through the forest on his typical route when he encountered the Dogman on an evening in June. He said he'd never heard of the cryptid before the incident, which took place within 15 to 20 seconds at most. "I could swear as a Christian on a Bible that this is all 100% factual truth," Barger says in the video. Leading up to the encounter, Barger realised that whilst driving he had an air leak. Wanting to fix it before he got too far into the forest, he stopped to look at it. He found the air leak by the back brake chamber on the trailer. With the materials to fix it, Barger positioned himself underneath the trailer and began to get what he describes as a bad feeling. I was hearing a vocalization that wasn't normal, Barger said in the video. It wasn't a sound I'd ever heard before. I was looking around and saw some shadowing in the woodline, but there was plenty of light to see. It was nowhere near getting dark yet. I was in bear country, so I perceived the shadowing as being a black bear at the time. When he realised that he could be near a black bear, Barger got back into the truck and checked out the air, which was all good to go. It held and took me not even 5 minutes to fix, Barger said in the video. The woods continued to give Barger a bad feeling, but he thought everything was normal until he started driving again. He checked his driver's side mirror for any traffic on the 2-lane road at the bottom of the hill. There was no traffic. As he started going up the hill and looked to his right side mirror, he saw it was darker than it should be. There was a wolf head the size of my window, and my windows were down, Barger said in the video. He was trotting along next to me, and I was going about 20 to 25 miles per hour at that point. And he was stooping down on 2 legs, looking down inside my cabin. I'm at 9 feet tall in my seat. His hands were coming up, scratching my windowsill. On my door handle, I could hear his claws. Time slowed down, Barger continued in the video. I thought like I was in an alternate reality or something, because this creature like this doesn't exist in the reality I've ever known. I've heard of Bigfoot and I know those to be something that is talked about, but this is a whole different story altogether. Bigfoot has nothing on the dogman, according to Barger. It has a lot of sharp teeth, and the teeth on this thing are like brilliant white, Barger said in the video. 3-inch long fangs bottom and top, pure black pointed ears. It had yellow eyes, with human-like hands, probably 14 inches across. It was at least 10 foot tall from how it was stooping into my cabin. His yellow eyes were darting all over the place and looking at me. How this creature looked was mad and determined to get me, Barger continued in the video. He was sneering. He wasn't making any noises vocally, but the looks he was giving me and the intelligence in his eyes were telling me that I'm here to get you and there's nothing you can do about it. Alright, let's just pause here for a second because holy fuck. See, this is my nightmare. Like, far out. I can't even, I'm not very tall, so I'm 5'2", and I can't even imagine a creature that's like 10 foot tall. You know, obviously, I'd be in a teeny tiny little car, so it would be different because it would have to be on all fours or whatever. But I just can't imagine a creature that's twice the size of my car trying to get at me. Okay, so then what happens next is probably the most American thing I've ever heard. Barger thought about trying to roll up the window, but instead he decided to focus on keeping the truck on the road. That is when he remembered his handgun. Barger pulled out his .45 Colt strapped to his waist and took 2 shots at the creature. He instantly went down, Barger said. I was looking at him and he was sliding into the weeds. I was at almost point blank range, so I'm pretty sure I got him through the right eye orbit. His head was huge. Everything on this animal was black except for his teeth and his eyes. I wasn't really panicked, but it's the scaredest I've ever been in my life. Barger, assuming the creature to be dead, wanted to turn around and check on the carnage to make sure he didn't lose his mind. About a mile up the road, he found a large spot. Oh my god, this is like the 3rd time I've recorded this guy. Hang on. About a mile up the road, he found a spot large enough to turn his truck around in. That's much better. I wanted to make sure I killed it, he said in the video. I wanted to know more about what had just occurred. As Barger was coming back down the hill, at almost 5 minutes after the shooting, it was gone. In its place was a Jeep and 2 people. Barger said he was concerned about the people being somewhere potentially dangerous, so he stopped to talk to them. They gave me a story that they were watching a few bears fighting each other. I was worried about them being outside with what had just happened, but I didn't want them to let them know what I had just done, so I left. Barger thinks because the other people he saw claimed to have seen 2 bears that maybe there could be more dogmen in the area besides the one that he shot. I was really in shock for a good while, Barger said in the video. I was still driving the truck and I didn't even know how I got back. I shouldn't have been driving the truck in that state of mind, but I wasn't going to stay around or park anywhere near there. It was the most terrifying thing I think anybody could go through, worse than any combat situation, because at least you know what you're dealing with there. Barger had nightmares for 6 months to a year on and off. The nightmares got less and less prevalent as time went on, and he doesn't deal with them anymore. I'm in a lot better shape now, and I thought it was important to get this information out. That's why my story is out now. It just took me this long to get it with the right people that I know have my back. Additionally, Barger claims that the federal government is keeping the existence of the dogman quiet. Of course. After I got better from my nightmares, I had a family member tell me that I should get this out to the public, Barger said in the video. So I talked to one podcaster that is popular in the cryptid space, and I didn't want to be out there publicly, so he took notes and narrated my story about 4 years ago. 3 months later, Barger said he was detained at a scale house by state police to wait for federal authorities. When the federal authorities, first showed up, they were very intimidating and angry, said in the video. I didn't know what was going on. They said, "You killed one of our assets, and this is how things are going to go down." Barger knew the only thing that he killed in the last year was a creature. This was their property and they were mad that I killed it. And they were trying to get me to stop talking about it. They probably knew who I was from the narration story. In the video, Barger said the federal authorities threatened him, confiscated his gun, and shut his bank account off for some time. I stopped talking about it up until recently, he said. This is probably another tool in their toolbox for military operations of some kind, and if they don't keep it under wraps, it won't be a useful tool anymore for them. The dogman has been on the mind of Michiganders, I like that, Michiganders, for the last 130 years, starting in 1887. That's when 2 lumberjacks saw a creature they described as having a man's body and a dog's head. According to the legend, the dogman appears to humans in 10-year cycles that fall on years ending in the number 7, according to the Michigan History Center. Barger's encounter happened in 2017, and that report was written by Angela Molker. Okay, so I have to admit that these kind of stories are my favourite, so I do keep a passive kind of eye out for them as I'm trawling the internet. So this article reminds me of a Reddit post that I came across when I have been researching the dogman in the past, and yes, this one I'm going to tell you now was the creepiest one that I'd read until recently when I found another even creepier one, which I'm going to read after it, but I want you to let me know in the comments or like on Instagram if you follow me there, which one you think's creepier. So this is a Reddit post that was posted in the Humanoid Encounters subreddit around a year ago by the user interesting_pop3017. I'm still having a hard time processing what I saw a few nights ago. About 3 nights ago, I saw something that I still can't fully understand or explain. First, a little background. I live in mid-Michigan in a small residential suburban town surrounded by cornfields. You know the type. However, I do live in a more populated area as my parents' house, where I currently reside, is located within walking distance of our downtown. Our street is by no means desolate, dark or isolated, and most of the houses are fairly close to one another. A pretty urban setting given the town itself. Okay, back to the other night. It was about 2:30 a.m, and since it's pretty normal for me to be up that late, me and my dog have developed what I now call our little routine. He comes to my door, lets out a huff to let me know that he's there, and then we go downstairs where I let him outside through the front door to go to the bathroom. After completing his business, he comes in and we share of a midnight snack of ham straight from the fridge. Now keep in mind, my dog is extremely well trained and very old. He doesn't need a leash or a fence to keep him from running away. He always comes right back after he's done. He'll even wait at the door if you aren't there. So on this particular night, I open the door for him and I'm just about to turn and walk away so I can prepare our midnight snack when I notice he's still standing on the porch staring across the street. This isn't completely out of the norm for him, but this was lasting a little bit longer than usual. When he finally jumps off the porch, I follow his line of sight to where he had been staring, and I see what looks like a large dog, or maybe even a wolf, slinking across my neighbour's yard on the other side of the street. For a few seconds, I'm trying to figure out what the fuck this thing is, because it looks like it could be a dog or something, which isn't right. It was way too long, and its movements wasn't normal. And even though it was about only 50 feet away, it looked as though it was blurry. I can't think of any other way to describe it. None of it made sense. At this point, I go into panic mode because so far this creature hasn't seemed to have noticed me or my dog. But what if it does? My dog doesn't stand a chance. Like I said, he's old and also a Pomeranian. Whatever this thing is, it would destroy him, no doubt. I decide to slowly open the outer glass door, hoping to create just enough noise to alert my dog that it's time to come in, but not enough for whatever the thing is to hear me. Luckily, my dog notices right away and starts running back towards me. But at the same time, this creature starts turning towards me, slowly. It almost felt fake how unnatural it moved, like animatronics or something. I'm not even sure what I'm looking at, but I have this indescribable feeling that I'm not supposed to be seeing this. So as this thing is turning to look at me, my dog is coming through the door simultaneously. And for about 1 second, I take my eyes off the creature thing to look at my dog and close the door. When I look back up, this thing has moved about 30 feet to the left of my neighbour's driveway rather than our yard, and is standing on its hind fucking legs at about 7 to 8 feet, staring at me. Now I'm really freaking out. How did it move so quickly? And how did it not make a single sound? How is it so fucking tall? I literally looked away for maybe a second. I looked away again to lock the door and gather myself, only to look out again and see absolutely nothing. It was gone. This whole ordeal lasted maybe 20-30 seconds total. Shaking, I give my dog his ham and mine, and I run downstairs to my brother's room in the basement to tell him what happened. Being a normal 19-year-old playing video games, his response was, "Wow, what the fuck, that's super weird." But honestly, I just needed to tell someone to confirm that what just happened actually happened, and I wouldn't wake up the next day and convince myself it was just a dream. Over the last few days, I've told anyone who would listen to what I saw, including my parents. Those who are closer to me seemed a bit more unnerved because, like I mentioned earlier, I don't usually believe in this type of thing. They could tell I was shaken by whatever it was that I saw that night. Tonight, after some rambling Googling, and as a result of my restless mind, I came across what appears to be the exact description of what I saw, the dog man, which eventually led me to this thread, and I've never heard anything else about it before. I am now fully convinced that I saw one in my front yard with my very own eyes, and it saw me too. So, you know what's interesting about this is that there's two things that kind of stick out to me in regards to both this story and the last story that I told, and that is the way that they both describe it as being almost unreal, and also how it felt like kind of time stood still, like there was this almost strange kind of, I guess, like maybe a glitch in reality or a time pause kind of element to it, that it seemed animatronic, which, you know, when you actually think about how the truckie described his encounter as well, like the way the eyes jerked around and all that kind of stuff, that it didn't feel like it was from this reality. Like that's kind of the same sentiment that this poster is expressing as well. You know, if we look back at it again, as well, the fact that he looked away for a second and it was gone, like the same thing happened to the truckie. Like he shot it, went back, and it was gone, you know? So the unnatural movement and the way that they both said that it felt like time slowed down, I think is a really strange feature in both of these stories. But let me know what you think. You know, whether these stories are true or not, I love them. And I think for a purpose such as Halloween, it's just they're the most perfect Halloween stories, because these genuinely do scare me. So with that in mind, this is a new story that I found, which was actually not posted in a paranormal subreddit or anything like that, but actually I found from a comment that linked the story into a True Off My Chest post, because they said that they'd never posted in Reddit before. They didn't really kind of know that there was this full kind of community of people that are interested in knowing about cryptids and cryptid sightings. So the last story was the creepiest story that I'd heard, but now I feel like this one takes the cake for me. So I present to you the creepiest dogman story that I've found so far. And yeah, I feel like once again, this is going to get you in the creeps. It really creeps me out. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so this post is from the True Off My Chest subreddit, and it was posted by Substantial Ad 470. Substantial. What's wrong with me? Why can't I talk today? Substantial Ad 7406. My brother and I saw something that I discovered years later to be a popular myth in northern Michigan. When we were teenagers, we took a trip with my cousin and her family to their cabin in Gaylord, Michigan. It was a very rustic cabin that'd been in her husband's family for generations. Nobody/nothing around for several miles, just very thick woods. Breathtakingly beautiful. There is no road that goes to that cabin, and there is no driveway or path. You literally follow a map and drive off into the woods until you find it. My cousin's husband mentioned that past generations had built other smaller cabins nearby and would write journal entries about their experiences. Some of the entries date back to the early 1900s. Thinking that was the coolest thing ever, we grabbed protection on the chance that we'd run into a bear or something, a flashlight because it was getting late, and made our way into the woods. We did not intend to be out long, mostly just planning a destination for the next day's adventures. When we found one of the cabins, maybe a 20-minute walk from the home cabin, we decided to take a break and see what's inside. Neither of us were aware just how quickly it gets dark when you're in the woods that thick, and the next thing we knew, it was pitch black outside. We panicked a bit because these are not woods that you want to be in at night, and without the light of day, we had no idea how to get back. Not the best decision making, but hey, what can you do now? We remember what we were told. Make enough noise, and if there are any dangerous animals nearby, they will likely get scared and go somewhere else. The predators in the area aren't exactly hungry, so we should be fine. We remember this too late, because the next thing we know, there's a pair of glowing yellow eyes off in the distance, moving very slowly towards us. A large white silhouette of a wolf comes into view with those yellow eyes. As soon as I can say, "Oh shit, is that a fucking wolf?" about a dozen more pairs of yellow eyes appeared. We had been joined by an entire pack of wolves just staring at us. To paint the picture, the cabin is about the size of a small RV. The entire front side of it is just plexiglass window, and the door was just a screen. We knew that we were supposed to make enough noise to keep predators away from us, but we had no idea what to do if we found ourselves in the middle of a wolf's den with all eyes on us. Both terrified and also in total awe, we just froze. We heard another wolf pack howling just a few miles from behind us, and then another one off to the right. This made us even more terrified because we were told that wolf packs typically avoid each other's territories. So what were they all doing so close? We were both completely aware that they could have just sounded closer than what they were, but in the moment, they literally sounded like they were right there. I couldn't tell if minutes were passing or hours. We were just frozen, hoping that my cousin's husband wasn't going to stumble into this den looking for us. The wolves started to lay down one by one. Every now and then we'd see a pair of eyes pop up, but mostly they just stopped caring that we were there. That's when it happened. Much like the first wolf we saw, a pair of yellow eyes was approaching from the distance, except this time the silhouette was huge and moved like a ghost. My brother grabbed my arm tightly. I think it was because he was trying not to piss his pants, and I just did when I saw it too. Whatever was walking towards us was not like the other wolves at all. The only way that I could describe what I was seeing would be to compare it to Professor Lupin from Harry Potter. It looked like a fucking werewolf, but on all fours. It had a humped back, and its shoulders were higher than what it would normally be on a canine. It moved its way around the sleeping wolves, towards the cabin, towards us. I'm doing everything in my mind to tell myself that it's just a weird looking wolf, maybe some sort of deformity, or that my eyes are playing tricks on me in the moonlight. There is no way that what I think I'm seeing is actually there. That was when it stood up, hunched over, and slowly walked up the stairs to the cabin door. Remember, the cabin door is just a screen. Instead of opening it, it just hunched over and sat down on the porch. I'll never forget the way that it was breathing. Heaving is more like it. Its entire body rocked backwards and forth with every inhale and exhale, while it looked over at the other sleeping wolves. I whispered to my brother, "What the fuck is that?" And it started to moan and then growl. Stood back up and walked over to the other side of the porch. Got back on all fours, crawled down the steps the way that a person would if it were on all fours, and began walking circles around the cabin before coming back up to the steps and rocking, heaving at the foot of the steps, again facing the wolves. Eventually it got up and walked to behind the cabin. I have never been so scared in my life. What the fuck was that thing? We sat there frozen in absolute silence until the sun came up. I'm sure that I didn't blink once, but we never saw the wolves get up and leave. When the sun started to peek through the tree canopy, the whole area was just clear. It was only us. Wolves really are majestic creatures. It was impressive to witness just how stealthy they can be. When we got back to the home cabin, we assured our panicking cousin that we were fine, but when we told her what we just experienced, her husband laughed at us. He'd been going to this cabin for his entire life and he's never seen a wolf come this close, let alone an entire pack. He seemed to not realise that he and his friends partying out there were a bit more of a deterrent than my brother and I sitting quietly. He about walked away from us when we told him we heard multiple packs. We decided not to mention Professor Lupin. If he thought we were imagining the wolves, what would be the point in telling him that we thought we were stalked by a mutant one? Neither of us are the type of people that believe in werewolves or things like that, and still don't. But we know that what we saw was unbelievable. Definitely not an animal that I've ever known to be in existence. Fast forward 13 years later to now, I'm watching a documentary on legends of different creatures and learn about the Michigan Dogman. Ridiculous name, with the most ridiculously and unbelievable stories like mine. I do a little more research and find that there are a lot more people from northern Michigan with a very similar story. The creature that these people are describing is almost exactly what I experienced. A human-like creature with the head of a dog. The reports of this creature are mostly centered around northern lower peninsula Michigan, where you'll find Gaylord. I'm not the type to jump to believing to things like this. All I know is that wolf looked mutated, and it stood up and walked up those steps. My brother and I have shared this with, do you remember that time in Gaylord? That people thought we were exaggerating about? Most will leave out the oddity, because besides the terror, this is the coolest thing I've ever experienced. It's just a cool story to share. Learning that this monster-like thing that we saw is actually a thing has rocked me to the core. What the fuck did I see that night? Interestingly, with this story again, we have that kind of reference to time feeling strange. And, you know, I've never experienced the terror of seeing a 7-foot bipedal wolf with a pack of wolves surrounding me in pitch black woodlands that I don't know and I'm not familiar with. So I can't say that I've ever experienced that kind of fear, which would cause me to feel like time has slowed down or to not be aware of how much time has passed. So, maybe that's a normal thing. Like if you've experienced something like that, then I'd love to hear you share that with me, or share your experience with time feeling stranger under immense fear, I guess. Is that a thing? I'm not sure. In the comments section, someone asked the OP, so did it lay across the door? Was it protecting or defending you from the other wolves? And the OP says, I thought it was nice to assume protection, but it did growl at me when I whispered, and it definitely felt threatening. Someone else mentioned that it can't enter a home unless invited. The concept of this makes the pacing circling the cabin a bit more terrifying. Also have to consider that the wolves knew we were there and didn't seem to care. So I'm not sure we needed protection. Like I said, the predators in the area weren't exactly starving, and the wolves aren't known for randomly attacking, I think. Although I suppose it's different if you find yourself in their den. It's such a wicked story. Even if it is just a story, that's pretty cool. So let me know if you've heard this one before. It's only got 86 upvotes and 17 comments. So, I don't think it's been covered on any other kind of podcast or anything like that. But to me, I just think, wow, I love it. I love the story and the way that it's been, put together. Even if it's not true, even if it's made up, I still feel like it deserves a Halloween mention for being a story about one of the most terrifying cryptids out there. Okay, so far in this Halloween Spooktacular, you've learned that both shadow people and dogmen haunt my dreams. And I think what we've got coming up next also gets an honourable mention, because this is something too which, maybe almost give it up for a while. And it probably is all Bigfoot and dogman and shadow people stories aside. I feel like this one is genuinely frightening to me, and something that, I don't really like to muck around with too much. I'll give you some thinking music to see if you can figure it out. So you're never going to believe this, but I was sitting here and I recorded about 20 minutes worth of the next segment, and all of a sudden the computer just shut down, lost everything, and fortunately it saved enough to this point that I didn't lose the entire project. That's word of the wise, just always continuously save as you're going. But I don't know, I'm going to take that as a sign from the universe not to do a segment on that particular topic, which just happened to be demonic possession. So how about that? Alrighty then, let's move right on to our next story, shall we? Alright, so some of you may remember that my father lives and works in New Zealand. So he spends a lot of time in the bush up there with his work. And so as a result of that, he has some pretty cool stories. So this story, I don't know if you'd necessarily call it a scary story, but I think that it has all the hallmarks of a great story to tell around Halloween time, because I don't know, for me it leaves you with a question. It leaves you with a question of, what was it? So it was a good thing that I rang Dad today, because I had it down on my list of things to talk about, but I didn't I didn't actually capture the whole story like I thought I did. So it was a slightly bit different to how I was gonna present it to you. So this one night my dad was in this particular area which has a stream down the bottom of a quite high embankment. It was pitch black and Dad was out just kind of doing his rounds when he heard what he believed to be a horse walking through the bush, and he could hear it kind of snorting, you know, the noises that horses make. So stomping and kind of making that snorting noise that they do. And yeah, so he's looking around for this horse. He's thinking it must be super close. It's got to be here somewhere, because he could hear it kind of walking around him. But he didn't see it. Didn't see any horse. Where he lives, it's not necessarily uncommon for there to be wild horses, or even just people's horses that just kind of roam free range horses, I guess. So he kind of didn't think too much of it. And the next day he went back with one of the new guys that just started working with him, and he was looking around in the mud, and the guy that he was working with asked him, like, what are you looking for? And Dad was like, well, I was here last night on the night shift and I could hear this horse. It sounded like a really big one, and I couldn't see it anywhere. It sounded like it was right by me, but I couldn't see it. So I just thought I'd come back and see if I can find any tracks. And lo and behold, there were no tracks that could be seen. So after Dad finished telling the new guy about what happened the night before with the horse and everything, he turns to my dad and he says, well, actually, my parents grew up around here. My dad lived around here when he was young, and he has a story about a horse in this exact same spot, actually. So my dad was like, oh yeah, you know, what is it? Let me know. And he says that when his dad was young, so this probably would have been maybe in the 50s, 60s, him and his brothers were on horseback and they caught the scent of a horse that they were going to try and capture so that they could break it in as a pet or for whatever reason. It was a big, beautiful black horse. And they tracked it all the way through the bush until it got to this particular place where my dad was the night before. And it was like a little stream. So they thought, oh, we've got him because we've got him cornered in this stream. There's a big embankment behind him. He won't be able to get away. So they're there about to catch this horse that they've tracked for this whole time, when the horse turns around, looks at the embankment like it's about to jump into it, goes to jump up the embankment, but what it actually did, instead of just jumping and clearing the embankment, it jumped and it just kept on going, just flew into the air. And so at that point, those boys had seen everything that they needed to see, and they just basically hauled ass home, because whatever it was, there wasn't no horse. It didn't take them long to figure out that whatever it was, they didn't want it to be any of their business. So it's kind of strange, because if you do a quick Google search or look on Reddit or anything like that, there's not a lot of flying horses stories, which kind of surprises me considering they feature so prominently in mythology, like especially Greek and Roman mythology. You know, you automatically think of Pegasus when you think of a flying horse. And even I think of the Dome of the Rock and the Buraq, the mythical horse that flew Muhammad to heaven in Islamic culture. So I tried to look outside the box a little bit to find stories which might be similar to this. And I was so interested and intrigued about the Scottish legend of the Kelpie. So what's a Kelpie, I can hear you saying. And I know that you're probably thinking that it is a gorgeous, highly intelligent Australian sheepdog, which is true. However, for today's purposes, we're talking about the Kelpie or water Kelpie, which is a shape-shifting spirit inhabiting lochs in Scottish folklore. Now imagine my eyes when I learnt that sometimes the Scottish Kelpie manifests as a black horse. So reading directly from Wikipedia, it says, a Kelpie or a water Kelpie is a shape-shifting spirit inhabiting lochs in Scottish folklore. It is usually described as a black horse-like creature that is also able to adopt a human form. Some accounts state that the Kelpie retains its hooves when appearing as a human, leading to its association with the Christian idea of Satan, as alluded to by Robert Burns in his 1786 poem Address to the Devil. Almost every sizable body in water in Scotland has an associated Kelpie story, but the most extensively reported is that of Loch Ness. The Kelpie has counterparts across the world, such as the Germanic Nixie, the Winwin of South America, and the Australian Bunyip. So in New Zealand, they have are like water guardian supernatural beings called Taniwha, and they live in the deep pools, rivers, dark caves, and in the seas. So in the ocean, they look like a whale or a large shark, sometimes a southern right whale or even a whale shark. But then in the rivers and the lakes, they have more of a lizard-like appearance, so they can look like a gecko or a tuatara. Sometimes they can look like a floating log that acts in a disconcerting way. Sometimes they tunnel through the earth and can uproot trees. So it is kind of similar that, although never appearing like a horse per se, they do appear to have shapeshifter abilities, much similar to other kind of supernatural beings that are associated with bodies of water, such as the bunyip and the kelpie. I don't know, I thought I'd throw that one in there just to see what you guys think. It captures my imagination. And, it's kind of bizarre because when I did a Google search for flying horse stories, like the classic ones come up, like we mentioned, the Pegasus and whatnot, but there's not a lot of flying horse cryptid stories. I managed to find one from 1878 when a West Virginian farmer claimed to have seen a flying white horse, but that's about it. So I don't know, have you ever seen a horse inexplicably fly, or something which appeared to be a horse? Maybe it was a shapeshifter. Like, let me know what your thoughts are on this one. All right, so we're an hour in to the Halloween special and we haven't spoken about ghosts yet. And it's kind of funny because I feel like that's the traditional kind of Halloween trope, is to speak about ghost stories, right? But up until this point I've avoided it just because I feel like everyone tells ghost stories at Halloween. And so I wanted to try some different things first. But here we are, the last story of the night, and we're going to be talking about ghosts. So hopefully, if you've made it through this far, you're nice and cozy somewhere, and, maybe on a road somewhere, deserted road, with a hot cup of coffee, I don't know, or maybe in front of a fire somewhere. I don't know, enjoying a bit of a freaky moment. So this story is actually an ex-boyfriend's mum's story from a guy I dated when I was like 16. And it always kind of freaked me right out because, I don't know, it just seemed like it had like cinematic qualities. Like, I feel like it could have been a movie. And now that I'm thinking about it, I want to know what you think it is. If you think that this is a ghost story or if it's maybe something a bit more nefarious. Because as I'm, thinking about it now, it's probably maybe more of like a mimic story as opposed to a ghost story. But maybe it's a bit of both, actually. There is a ghostly element to it as well. So for the sake of this story, I'm going to call the girl Jane. And you have to imagine that this probably was the early 80s. And she had just moved out of her parents' house to go to university. And so she moved into a house that she rented with one of her really good friends. And so you probably need to understand a little bit of the history of the place where I live. So I come from a place called Adelaide in South Australia. And unlike the other kind of major cities in Australia, Adelaide was a free settler colony. So it didn't have convicts or penal colonies here. So people that came to live in South Australia came here mainly of their own volition. And in the early days, the first 40 years between 1850 and 1890, there was, I guess, a lot of uncertainty. They used to call it like the boom or bust years because they were kind of, the colony was kind of finding its feet, I guess. So as a result of this, in the city, there are a lot of really stately homes, big, beautiful homes that were owned by people that made a lot of money in those periods. And also the opposite side of that was that there were probably lots of people that lost a lot of money and lost everything. So the house that she had moved into with her friend, well, it was more, I guess, like an apartment, townhousey kind of thing, was actually an old mansion that had kind of been retroactively subdivided to be 4 apartments. I remember this lady telling me that when the weird things started happening, they seemed pretty innocent at first. Things that you could just, like put down to maybe a draft, or maybe you left the window open and a neighbour's cat got in, because she would say that she'd hear things like sounds like her roommate was home, but she wasn't. Then things began to get a little bit more creepier, and there was this particular night where she could hear her friend calling her from what sounded like the front door. So apparently it was almost like a 2-story kind of setup to get let in to the house, and her bedroom was by the street, and she could hear her friend calling her out, like calling, Jane, let me in, I've lost my keys, like, Jane, can you let me in, hey Jane. And she was like, what the fuck, like, it's so early, it's like 2:00 in the morning, like. And she kind of yelled back down to her, okay, yep, no worries, I'll be down there in 2 seconds. And so she got up, put her dressing gown on, and went downstairs, and there was no one there. Opened the door, looked outside, and there was no one there. And, you know, I don't know if it was the next day or a couple of days later, when she caught back up with her roommate, she said, what was the deal with the other night? Like, you got me out of bed to open the door, and then when I got down there, you were gone. Like, that's pretty shitty. And she was like, what are you talking about? I didn't do that at all. And she goes, actually, I was going to say something to you, because only a couple of nights before that, you did the same thing to me. I could hear you calling my name out from the street. So that's when they kind of put 2 and 2 together and realized that this was both happening to them. So that's what's kind of started the conversation. And these are pretty serious women, like they were studying nursing. So, you know, maybe that factored into it, like long nights and lots of study, lots of things taking their minds up mentally, mental fatigue even. They're the skeptical arguments, I guess. But then what happened was that it took a slightly kind of more violent turn, I guess. And Jane recalls one night when she had a very terrifying encounter with something that she could only describe as otherworldly. So she said she was lying in her bed, just a regular kind of night. She wasn't asleep, she wasn't dreaming, she knew that. But she was kind of just laying there half awake, half asleep, when all of a sudden she said that she felt a coldness come across her, like a wave from the bottom of her feet to the top of her head. And she was laying there and she was thinking, oh my God, I'm in really serious trouble here. I'm in big danger. Like, she just had the sense of impending doom. And then right before her eyes manifested this disgusting, scary looking man with the most leering, horrible look in his eyes, like he was about to murder her. And she said that he was just floating above her. So, and she could see through him, but she could see his face. But he was like floating above her with this look on his face like he was going to murder her, but also kind of laughing. Eventually she was able to move again, and the apparition dissipated, but it was enough to scare her enough to leave the house. And she never experienced anything like that again. So it wasn't as if she had suffered sleep paralysis in the past or anything like that. And as soon as she left the house, things were better. No more strange knocks, no more voices from the street, and no scary man appearing over her bed at night. So do you think that a regular ghost, like just your standard kind of haunting, can actually mimic real life people that are alive now? Or do you think that that's something, you know, more, I guess, demonic maybe? You know, because in my mind I think that that's obvious deception, which makes me think that it's not just standard spirit being. And even as I'm sitting here thinking about it, I myself have even experienced things very similar to this. So actually, I think I've shared it on a previous podcast about my brother and I, and how we both hear our mum yelling our name when we're in the bathroom downstairs at my parents' house, to the point where, like, I have actually turned the shower off and put my head out to listen to see, like, if it's my mum actually, like, yelling at me something, even though she knows that I'm in the shower. And also another thing which I hear when I'm in that bathroom downstairs is the sound of like pots crashing. And the same thing, I've gotten out of the shower thinking that the dog's gotten into something because I can hear it. And, you know, that very, very well just be the acoustics of the house and, you know, some kind of, you know, auditory pareidolia or something like that. But yeah, the fact that my brother and I both hear my mum saying our name specifically, that may be childhood trauma. We have joked about that as well, but it is just really funny that I can distinctly hear my mum like she's talking to me, like yelling something out to me from upstairs while I'm in the bathroom downstairs. And so I found it really interesting that my brother has the same experience. It's actually surprising because if you do a quick Reddit search, there seems to be lots of people experiencing mimic behavior in their houses. I found one story that was particularly kind of freaky to me, I guess. It's actually a response, a comment, not an original post. Handle seems to be her full name, so I'm probably not going to say her handle, but it was on the subreddit Ghosts. And yeah, basically she says she's responding to a post where someone said that her parents hear the kids' voices responding, like calling out to them, and then someone saying, "Mum, I'm right here," and both of them aren't right there. So this Redditor responded to this and said, "My family and I lived in a house that had mimics. It was about 15 years ago. It mimicked the sound of my husband coming home from work. He's whistling as he came up the front stairs, opening and shutting the door, took off his work boots, went into the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. I could hear all the sounds of him tapping out the cold coffee filter, turning on the water, etc. Then I'd hear him fill up the kettle as if he was about to make me a cup of tea. That was out of character. So I got up, having just trying to get my 2-year-old son to sleep, and checked the kitchen. No husband. It wasn't even time for him to get off work. My 2-year-old heard him as well. A few months later, I was at a workshop and my husband stayed home from work to watch our son. Same exact thing. He was trying to get our son to nap and they both heard me come home, proceed to the kitchen to make coffee and tea. He said it sounded exactly like me, my steps, me hanging up my coat. But of course, when he came out to see me, I wasn't there. Then one night, my husband woke me up because our son was crying in his room. He insisted that I go and get him because he was lazy, but also very chicken of our house at night. When I got to my son's bedroom door, he'd already gotten out of bed and was in the process of opening his door. I kind of opened it, but slowly so that he wouldn't fall backwards. As I opened it, I saw him in a white nightgown just for a second. But actually, he didn't sleep in white nightgowns. He slept in Spider-Man pajamas, and he was fast asleep in bed. In the instant that I saw him, he disappeared and the crying stopped. My husband and I were awake for a long time after that, totally freaked out. That house never felt negative though, but it was always very active. Someone walked around the house every single night for the 2 years that we lived here. Toys would always turn on about 2 a.m. Things would disappear and then reappear. We would hear a newborn baby crying in the house, but could never pinpoint where it was. We would also hear a woman getting angry in the kitchen, pretty much any time that we tried to listen for it. So many other things happened there that I can't even remember, but it was constantly active, to the point that when I think back on it, I wonder why it wasn't more of a big deal. Why didn't I try to get a paranormal team in there? It was 2002. Possibly there just wasn't a ton on the internet in regards to groups. I don't know. I just never thought about it. I do paranormal investigations and I would love to get my hands on a house as active as that house was. I drove by it a few times wanting to go back and knock on the door and ask the new owners, our landlord sold it after we moved, if they were experiencing anything. But I was too worried about freaking them out. The house got knocked down about 4 years after we moved out. One thing about that house was that we had the best of luck while living there. Our relationship was really good. We were making lots of money and we managed to get out of debt, save money for a deposit to buy a house, and we were able to buy our first home in the 2 years that we lived here. It had really good vibes. So I like that. I feel like that's a better ending than thinking that it's a demonic possession or the beginning of a demonic infestation, which is what a lot of people try to say. Kind of interesting because there are a lot of comments too that say that whatever the ghost is, it mimics the mother of their house, which is so, like, I wonder, I feel like I'm going to jot this down because I feel like this needs more research done on it, because it does seem that a lot of them mimic mothers, and it's so strange that that's like a common kind of thread that I'm noticing that even I myself have experienced. Alrighty, so I reckon that that's going to almost be the end for me today, and as always, if any of these stories resonated with you, if you have anything that you'd like to add, you can always send me an email at aisforalienpodcast, or also keeping it supernatural podcast at gmail.com, because I'm going to upload this to both of them, because this is kind of going to be like the first podcast that I'm uploading to Keeping It Supernatural. I love connecting with you guys. Please connect with me on my social medias at A's for Alien Podcast and Keeping It Supernatural podcast on Instagram. And yeah, I can't wait to see what you guys think. I'm wishing you a very happy Halloween. I hope you get to eat all the candies and dress up in all the outfits. And at the very least, you're cozied up somewhere, listen to your favorite spooky podcasts. And I'm really glad that I could spend this time with you today. Thank you so much for being here with me. And yes, keep it spooky, keep it scary. Oh my gosh, that's the worst sign off ever. I'm going to have to work on that one.